Greetings! And today I am going to make something called ghee. And I've spent quite a bit of time looking at different people's methods of making ghee, which is also known as clarified butter, although not quite the same thing, as I have learned. And the benefits of making ghee are really the reason why we want to go through the process. So first off, what is ghee? Ghee is when you take butter and you essentially extract all the liquids that are in here aside from the fat. So that's any water, moisture content, as well as the proteins. Also, earlier I alluded to clarified butter, which some people consider to be ghee, is actually not quite the same as ghee. So here's why, as I've learned more recently, is clarified butter just a process of heating the butter so that you extract the other constituents that are not the fat. But that's just with any butter. However, when you use cultured butter, the microbial activity in that butter actually modifies or leaves certain elements into the fat that then give ghee its more nutritive and health promoting aspects. So if you're using some conventional $2 stick of butter and probably salted and just coming from cows that were not pasture raised and probably fed lots of chemicals, and this butter is now cultured, then you're going to get not a very good product. You're going to get a concentration of all that muckiness in your clarified butter. Now, we could say that me making ghee with this is also clarified butter. However, what makes it ghee is that we're using cultured butter, organic cultured butter. So it's gone through that process of having either been allowed to ferment with the culture to grow in there or culture added in. Whatever the case, this becomes a much more nutritive property as opposed to just clarified butter. So there is that key difference there. And you can even look up on YouTube other videos of how people actually make their own butter and going through that process of churning the butter and doing the separation. It's more involved. It's not impossible to do, but probably most people might not want to go through that process. So if you can buy organic cultured butter, then you're well off to use that. So that's what we're going to use here today. So I'm going to make 2 pounds worth today, and you can double the batch, you can make less, whatever you want. It depends on the frequency of how much you use and how willing you are to do this process over and over again. So that's what we're going to have to work with. Now, why would we want to do that? Well, there's a couple of benefits to doing this. First, you can leave ghee out at room temperature, and if you've done the process appropriately, then you're not going to get spoilage happening. Second, it tastes amazing, and you can use it in the way that you would butter. Third, it's also got a very high smoke point. In fact, probably among the highest that I'm aware of. So whenever you need any kind of grease for cooking, ghee is absolutely perfect for that. So far from what I have learned is that animal fats have the highest threshold for being able to tolerate heat without actually breaking apart, becoming rancid and trans fatty, and therefore harmful to you. Fourth, ghee also makes a wonderful delivery mechanism for getting other nutrients into the body because it's fat. And also due to the size of the fat molecules, are also easily used up as energy. So even though it's a large quantity of it is saturated fat, don't be confused with the propaganda that saturated fat is a bad thing for you, because it's not. We need a proper ratio of fats in our diet, which we would normally be getting from whole foods. And so that's really important in a world where our bodies are always being imposed upon with toxins from the environment, external and internal from what we eat. And a lot of these toxins are fat soluble, which I'm sure I've mentioned in other videos, meaning that they really glaze into your cells, and when you get fat accumulating, this is a lot of the toxic load that's holding onto inside your body. So your body's going to work with what it's got to work with. So using something like ghee on a daily basis gives our bodies a good fat source to rebuild tissues that require fat, with the potential then to help flesh out some of the other more toxic or rancidity of unhealthier fats that we may have exposed ourselves to in the past. So there will probably be a couple common questions that people ask when it comes to ghee about storage. Does it need to be refrigerated? Here's my take on it. You can leave it out at room temperature, perhaps in a smaller container, and you can store the remainder of your batch in the fridge. Refrigeration always does seem to make things last longer. However, from all the people's experiences that has been relayed to me, the leaving ghee out at room temperature, it will not go rancid. And if it does, because of any of the reasons I mentioned before, due to what might be left in the ghee, you'll probably start to notice a change in smell, perhaps in the taste, so then you'd know not to consume it anymore. But to be honest with you, the ghee just doesn't last long enough to really go through that problem. So by all means, keep it at room temperature. It'll stay nice and soft, but solid but soft, so that you can spread it on things. And you can just go through that and then take out some from what you're storing in your fridge and leave that one out, and you go through that one and just repeat that process. Another question that might pop into people's minds is, what about people that can't tolerate dairy? Well, many people can tolerate ghee who can tolerate dairy, probably most, if not almost everyone, because if you are getting ghee that's properly made without any of the protein left in it, then that's not going to elicit a reaction in people who normally have a reaction to the lactose or the casein that would be found in the protein and the butter. So that's not a worry there, especially if you're making it yourself. You can really scrutinize the process and make it a really clean, clear substance. And one of the tidbits I just want to throw out there that I learned in nutrition school was that butyric acid is something that the microbiology, the bacteria of our intestines actually produce as a byproduct of healthy bacteria that nourish and act as an energy source for the epithelial cells that line our intestinal tract. So butter, guess what, has a lot of butyric acid. So is it any surprise that Ayurveda uses this gold substance as a way to nourish the digestive tract, among a plethora of other things, such as skincare and what else? It's kind of cool to note that butter, in a way, is an extract of milk, and ghee is an extract of butter. So you're really getting a non-processed, refined version of basically gold for the body. So we're going to get to work, and it's a really easy process. I'm going to show you how this is all done. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in comments. We can always address those later. Okay, so make sure that you're using a pot that is of good quality. I like using my plasma titanium pots. You could also use stainless steel, porcelain, whatever you have. I don't like Teflon personally, but so I'm using these guys, and all I did was chop off the 2 sticks of butter into smaller pieces so it melts quicker. And you can see it's already pretty well melted because the heat is distributed really well in these pots. And I do want to emphasize again, earlier I mentioned organic butter, but the importance of using butter from cows that have been pasture raised, so that you get more of the nutrients that are going to be available in the fat from a cow that ate a good diet. So if they're pasture raised, eating grass and foliage, then you're going to get your content of vitamin K, vitamin A, even vitamin D. So you might as well want to go to the best source butter that you can get. So basically now I'm just going to let this completely melt. Okay guys, so a little bit on the heating temperatures for preparing the ghee. Initially, you do want to have this, depending on your pot, on the temperature probably around medium. If you have a pot like this that distributes heat really well, then you can probably keep it at minimum the entire time. Otherwise, you start off about medium, and then once it reaches that little tiny bit of a simmer, or even just a sub-simmer, you can decrease the temperature to the possible lowest amount that is available on your stovetop. Now, you don't want to cover this because you want to let the moisture escape, so leave it uncovered. But if you don't want anything potentially falling in, well, then you could always use something like this or whatever else you got and just cover it up like that if it's an issue. Now, this is an optional step that I am doing right now, and you do not have to do this. However, I've made ghee a number of times, and I wanted to try something different. So I'm going to infuse my ghee with turmeric. And you can infuse your ghee with any herbs that you want, whether it be a dry powder or fresh herbs, it's fine. The reason that I want to do this is because, as I said, fat is a wonderful delivery mechanism for nutrients into the body, and turmeric is just, where do I even begin with the benefits of turmeric? So this is going to be something that I would now use more for like a savory, in combination with savory food or savory dishes. You could also make like a sweet ghee with like vanilla, cinnamon, nutmeg, something more for like adding to a sweet dish, or just leave it plain and then add spices afterwards. So I'm putting in about probably not even 2 tablespoons worth of turmeric into 2 pounds of butter. And I'm doing this early on in the process because I want the herbs to become really well infused with the butter. Now eventually you'll see that as time passes, the solidification is going to happen on top as well as on the bottom for the dairy aspects, the proteins that are going to bind together. And this will later be filtered out, which I'll show you. But for now, we're just going to let this go. I'm being gentle when I'm stirring the spice, because I don't necessarily want to be grabbing the stuff from the bottom. It will likely start to brown a little bit, and burn just slightly, and that's not something that I want to combine into the ghee. So this is just a gentle stir. And I want to be a little savvy and also combine a little bit of black pepper because it combos really well with turmeric for absorption. So I'm going to do that as well. I like to use wooden cutlery. It's just my thing, but I kind of like the idea of wood being more natural thing to bring into contact with food, and so I avoid to use, other than the fact that we don't want to damage the pot with metal so it doesn't ruin its non-stick qualities. It's just something about metal that doesn't feel quite right. So ever since I made the switch to using wooden, bamboo, cutlery, it just feels better. But that's just my quirk. So this whole process is going to be probably about 40 to 45 minutes. We'll gauge it based on appearance, but that's generally the time frame that you're looking at, leaving this simmering. So we'll take a look in a bit and see how it's going. So you guys can see it's gently simmering, and this scum that builds up on the top, part of the solid particles in the ghee, you can gently, at the surface level, just scrape it out to the side. You don't necessarily have to, because when we filter this in the end, they would all be caught, but it will give you a better visibility into how things are doing underneath. So you just have to be really gentle with it so you don't stir things up too much. I'm just doing this with the spoon, but you might even have better luck using something like this to scoop it up, which I'm going to try. So I'm not really going to worry too much about all the rest because I'm going to filter it out later. And you definitely do want to be very cautious. This is essentially boiling oil right now, so you want to be very careful this doesn't splash out and burn yourself. So it should be almost done at this point. Alright guys, so it's been about 45 minutes or so, and because I did put in the turmeric, it's a lot darker than what you normally would see when you do this. But I can tell the way it's coagulated, it seems to be just about ready. So I'm going to now strain it through one of those nut milk bags. Now, I often see people just using a regular strainer, but I do like these because they're just to catch everything. So I'm going to be doing that right now. And in the event that we don't necessarily get everything, we can always put it back in the heat and let it boil some more if there's any more of the protein still lingering. So I'm going to do this quickly but gently. Want to be careful not to burn yourself. And you can really notice that there's what seems like those burned particles, and that's going to be all the proteins that are now separated, fully separated. And I'm going to squeeze this out. This is really hot, by the way. What we're left with is beautiful golden ghee. So of course any spices that you would have combined into this mixture would have been caught here in the nut milk bag. Okay, so I'm being a little finicky today, and I'll be also squeezing a little bit too much of the bag, and a little bit of the protein content fell back into the ghee. So I decided to put it back on the stove top, and this is actually going to allow for, with a little bit of the heat again, when it comes to just a slight simmer, if there's any whey or casein protein left at all in there, it will solidify a little bit more and it'll become a lot more noticeable. So while I got my second simmer getting underway, the inevitable question of what do we do with the leftover proteins, and in this case turmeric, that is left over here. Most of the videos that I've come across, people just tend to throw this out. However, I have tried this before and it actually tastes amazing. So if yours didn't get burned, then you can actually just eat this. If you don't have any issues with eating lactose, whey, etc., then you can use this as a topping on any food, make a sandwich with it, even just eat it upright. Keep in mind that when you make this without the turmeric or spices, it's kind of just a off-white, beige kind of color, and it will obviously taste different without the spice. But either way, it tastes amazing, and I definitely suggest that you give it a shot before you throw it out. Alright, so this is going to be my second pouring, and I'm not going to bother with nut milk / cheesecloth this time. I'm just going to use the strainer. And there's really not much left in there, just a little tiny bit of foam, but really, this is not anything significant at all. So virtually nothing is left at this point. So as you can see, about 2 pounds of butter made is about 28 ounces or 3.5 cups of ghee. And I'm going to transfer this into jars. You want to make sure that anything that this is not touching has no water, no moisture, because it is that moisture content that would otherwise cause the ghee to turn rancid or have any molds or anything like that growing on it. So yeah, you can divide this up into a smaller container or whatever size you want. To one keep out on your counter, another one you can store in the fridge. So this is the second run through of liquid gold ghee. So I definitely want to encourage you to store it in a glass container, definitely not plastic, because oils do tend to corrode plastics and then also absorb the compounds in the plastic, and you don't want to be eating that. So you got your glass container and just fill it to the max. I also like to line the top of the container that I make. Anytime that I make anything that's kind of like greasy or whatever, just to not make contact with the metal lid, I do like to use something like a baking sheet to isolate it from the lid. So I cover it with that and then I'll screw it in. I'm not going to do that just yet though, because this is still really hot and I want it to completely cool down before I close it, otherwise moisture will collect inside. So you can kind of just cover it up with like a paper towel so that nothing falls inside. And once that is completely cooled down, you're going to notice that it will be opaque. It will no longer be see-through. And if you happen to notice any white that settles on the bottom, that's going to be the whey protein that may have been left over from not completely solidifying in your making process. And that's okay. Like, you can just eat the ghee from the top, and then if you're sensitive to the whey, you can leave that out. If you're not, you could always eat that. But they will separate because the fat just has a different density than the other liquids. So that's it. Okay, so here is the completely finished product already bottled. And over here, this one I've kept in the refrigerator for a while now. And this one I've left at room temperature. This one in the fridge is completely solid. But notice that there's no white at all on the bottom, so there's no whey, which means they did a really good job with the cooking and then the filtering so that there's no milk solids left in here at all. And yeah, use this stuff daily. It is incredibly nourishing, and you can easily use up to close to a tablespoon a day, or maybe you can add it to anything for flavor and use it in combination with different herbs to get even more absorption of the any therapeutics that you guys are trying to use. And the last thing I'll say is that wherever you do store these, you want to make sure that they're away from light, because remember that it's oxygen, light, and heat, or extreme heat, that will denature fats and oils. So there you go, guys. Homemade ghee.